They told me my driveway was ruining the neighborhood, so they built a wall across it. I was loading my truck for work and suddenly I'm facing a shoulder-high slab like HOA Karen just declared martial law. Drop a comment if your neighbor ever went full dictator, because the way I flipped this concrete insult into a legal nightmare, let's just say she never saw the parking meters coming. It started like most suburban tragedies. A Tuesday, a cup of lukewarm coffee and a clipboard. I was loading up my truck, minding my own business, when Brenda Calloway, president, part-time real estate snob, full-time menace, marched up like she was auditioning for a daytime courtroom show. Clipboard in one hand, iced latte in the other, she pointed at my truck like it had insulted her family name. "Mr. Greer," she sniffed, "this vehicle is a visual violation of community harmony." "Lady, it's a Ford F-150, not a wrecking ball." I should have known then that she didn't come to talk. She came to conquer. 2 days later, I woke up to the sound of industrial beeping. Not a trash truck. No, this was the sound of my property rights being poured in 3,000 pounds of HOA-certified spite. A shoulder-high concrete wall stood between my driveway and freedom, like a tombstone for liberty with no epitaph, just judgment. I stood there in my slippers, staring at this slab like it was a prank from a dictatorship-themed reality show. But Brenda, oh, she strutted past in her rhinestone denim jacket and said the line that still echoes in my brain. "This isn't your driveway anymore." See, Brenda didn't believe in conversation. She believed in declarations, like HOA Napoleon with a bob cut. The violation notice claimed I was operating a commercial enterprise incompatible with neighborhood aesthetics. Translation, I fix laptops for farmers and don't drive a Lexus. Never mind that I'd followed every single rule to the letter. Never mind that Brenda's own son sold bootleg fireworks from their garage last summer. In her eyes, my truck was terrorism and her son's firecrackers were patriotism. Irony much? But the wall wasn't just concrete, it was psychological warfare. Suddenly, neighbors wouldn't wave. One guy actually whispered thoughts and prayers as he drove by like I had HOA leprosy. And the worst part? Every evening, Brenda would do a little lap in her golf cart, yes, golf cart, slow-driving past my property like a prison warden on parade. Each pass felt like she was measuring my soul for more fines. That night, I sat on my porch staring at the cement blockade that separated me from my own garage, wondering if I'd lost the American dream to a woman who once fined someone for overly reflective garden gnomes. But just when I thought I'd been HOA'd into submission, my neighbor Chuck came by with 2 things, a casserole and a copy of the original community bylaws. Chuck's a retired librarian with more receipts than the IRS, and as it turns out, Brenda had just stepped in the one thing more dangerous than gossip, a legal technicality. The ones who weaponize clipboards often forget that paperwork goes both ways. When someone rewrites the rules mid-game, the real win is learning how to play smarter. What did Chuck find in the bylaws that made Brenda panic so hard she skipped her HOA wine tasting? Comment cemented lies if you think this wall's about to crumble. Legally, not just literally. Loretta once fined a guy for putting a gnome in the wrong spiritual quadrant of his garden. So when she brought cement trucks to my house, I knew she wasn't bluffing. She was cracking open her HOA apocalypse bucket. I woke up to the sound of beeping that didn't belong to any ranch rooster or delivery truck. It was the mechanical symphony of HOA vengeance. Outside, 3 contractors were pouring concrete across my driveway like they were sealing off a crime scene. The kicker? Loretta Callahan sat across the street in her white Range Rover, sipping what I can only assume was cucumber mint tyranny, waving an HOA emergency directive like she'd just passed a new constitution. "Mr. Duncan," she yelled through her window, "this is for the good of the community." Now every morning I had to park on the shoulder like a roadside vendor and lug 70 pounds of tech repair gear across gravel, past the wall of shame and through the side entrance. It was less a commute and more a daily performance art piece titled "Local Man Carries Tools Through HOA Nonsense." I'd catch glimpses of neighbors watching through blinds, sipping coffee like they were mourning my civil liberties. One guy even muttered, "Tough break, Ned," before accelerating like guilt was contagious. Then came the laminated sign. Loretta had the audacity to tape a plastic plaque onto the concrete blockade that read in Comic Sans, "Because cruelty needs style, this is what noncompliance looks like." It was 18 inches tall and 2 feet wide, not unlike Loretta's patience. She called it a visual violation barrier. I called it a tombstone for logic. The HOA newsletter claimed it was an educational installation. If so, the only lesson I learned was how fast injustice can set like quick-dry cement. But you know what's worse than a cement wall across your driveway? The silence of cowed neighbors. People you used to chat with about football now avoided eye contact like you were radioactive. Loretta's real power wasn't her clipboard. It was the fear she installed like outdoor lighting. And that fear, poured slab by slab, was heavier than anything I carried from my truck each day. Just when I thought it couldn't get more surreal, in waddled a woman in orthopedic boots and a vengeance-filled apron. Her name was Mabel, 92 years old, holding a Tupperware of blueberry pie in one hand and rolled-up papers in the other. "Heard Loretta built you a wall. I brought pie and your way out." Turns out, those papers were copies of the original land development permits from 1987, and something in there had the power to shake up Loretta's castle of concrete and delusion. Tyrants don't always need guards. Sometimes all it takes is neighbors too tired, too scared, or too polite to ask, "Wait, can she even do that?" What secret did Mabel's dusty permits reveal about the wall, and why did it make Loretta triple her Botox appointment? Comment blueprint pie. If you think a casserole might just collapse this concrete monarchy. Mildred Haggerty looked like a retired librarian but dropped legal facts like she'd clerked for Judge Judy in a past life. "Loretta's playing HOA poker with Uno rules," she said, handing me a deed older than Loretta's forehead Botox. I was halfway through Mildred's blueberry pie and fully convinced she was my new general when she rolled out the first bomb. Loretta's award-winning tulip fortress and koi pond sat entirely on shared community land. Not her private front yard. Not even close. She's been landscaping like a queen on county property, Mildred snorted. "That ain't a yard. That's HOA fund imperialism." My eyes widened as she pulled out a document stamped in faded ink, clearly notarized when Elvis was still performing. Then she hit me with a second slice of truth. HOA rule changes required a 60% community vote. Loretta, apparently, had been bypassing that like a raccoon bypasses a locked trash can. Forged signatures, silent ballots, made-up emergency amendments. This wasn't just abuse of power, it was HOA fraud with an arts and crafts twist. I felt like I'd walked into a mafia movie directed by Martha Stewart. Mildred leaned in, whispering, "She called it a vote. I call it a solo performance." Fueled by pie and petty rage, I took a trip to the county records office. It was less CSI and more DIY with paper cuts, but after 5 hours and 2 suspicious looks from the clerk, I found it missing plats, driveway easement notes, and a curious receipt for koi pond filters, charged to community beautification funds. That filter cost more than my entire truck's front suspension. Loretta wasn't just blocking driveways, she was siphoning community money to fund her suburban Versailles. I felt a righteous fury rise in me, somewhere between courtroom drama and soap opera vengeance. Just when I thought this couldn't get weirder, Mildred invited me over for tea and revelation. She led me to her attic, which smelled like nostalgia and mothballs. In the corner sat a dusty, glass-eyed taxidermy goose. "Meet George," she said, "and meet the truth." Inside the bird's hollow belly, wrapped in plastic and old Whispering Willow's HOA founding documents, were the original Whispering Willow's HOA founding document. Real ones, with real rules, real signatures, and the real power to flatten Loretta's delusion of dominion. Mildred smiled like a woman who'd waited 20 years for the HOA queen to slip on her own tiara. When tyranny starts pruning roses with other people's money, all it takes is one overlooked goose to tear the garden down. What's Mildred's next move, and why does it involve folding chairs and retirement veterans? Type porch revolt if you're ready to see sandals stomp policy. I paid $37.50 for a parking meter sign that legally turned Loretta's flower bed into a coin-fed frontier of justice. She called the sheriff. He tipped his hat and said, "Ma'am, community property is fair game." That's the moment I knew this wasn't just HOA war anymore. This was revolution in reverse, and I had exact change. At 8:00 a.m. in sharp, 12 trucks pulled into the former sacred azalea zone with precision so tight it looked choreographed by ranch dads on Red Bull. The drivers were my neighbors, my allies, and one retired vet named Big Ron, who brought a fold-out grill and started cooking sausages like we were tailgating at a legislative hearing. Every person paid their $5 and left tips in the jar marked Community Comeback Fund. I sat in my collapsible chair with a clipboard and iced tea, waving at every vehicle like I was hosting a backyard barbecue of petty justice. Loretta watched from her bay window, mouth agape, hair rollers still attached like battle armor. Then she came storming out in a leopard robe and orthopedic fury. "This is a declaration of driveway war," she screeched, clutching a poodle in one hand and a stack of cease and desist letters in the other. The poodle looked embarrassed to be there. I was mid-live stream when she tried to pull the meter out of the ground with bare hands, shrieking about soil desecration and permit witchcraft. The internet loved it. One guy commented, "Is this Yellowstone for HOA dads?" The real beauty unfolded around 10:45 when Loretta tried to leave for her Tuesday Board of Beautification luncheon, only to find her Range Rover hemmed in by 2 Ford F-250S and a Subaru Outback with a kayak on top. She stood frozen, mouth twitching before bellowing, "You'll regret invading my roses," like a soap opera villain banished from her own tulip empire. Meanwhile, I offered to help her back out if she could name one clause in the bylaws that I'd broken. Spoiler, she couldn't. Her answer was just incoherent rage and the word vibes. Then came the grand finale. Loretta marched into the yard wielding pruning shears and started lopping off her own rose bushes in protest, yelling, "If I can't control it, nobody will," as petals flew like floral confetti in a Shakespearean meltdown. Big Ron, without missing a beat, held up his phone and said, "Facebook Live, baby." And just like that, 2,300 people tuned in to watch the HOA president dismember begonias while screaming about constitutional erosion and the smell of diesel. Sometimes, the loudest tyrants collapse under the quiet weight of paperwork and public parking. What does Loretta destroy in her fury? And who shows up next with legal documents and lemonade? They called it the Law and Order trial. Loretta called it a conspiracy by rogue gardeners and driveway anarchists. The only thing missing was a theme song and popcorn. But I brought a slideshow, a banjo playlist, and 3 witnesses who'd been steamrolled harder than her peony beds. The courtroom smelled like lemon pledge and resentment. The prosecutor opened by revealing Loretta used HOA funds to install sculptures around her property. Abstract ranch expressionism, as she called them. One looked like a confused chicken, another like a cowboy melting in the sun. The jury squinted, then chuckled. I leaned over to my neighbor and whispered, "She embezzled $3,800 0 cents to build a salad bar for ghosts." That's when I knew. This trial was going to end like her begonias, clipped and composted. When it was my turn, I pulled out a flash drive labeled Loretta's HOA Circus and clicked through a PowerPoint that included photos of her fake violation notices, her rage emails typed in Comic Sans, and my personal favorite, an animated pie chart tracking her weekly wine budget. The slideshow was set to soft banjo music, which the court reporter said was unprofessional but oddly therapeutic. At one point, Loretta hissed, "This is a character assassin," and the judge deadpanned, "You volunteered as tribute?" The highlight came when witness after witness stood up and confirmed what we all knew. Loretta made up rules like she was playing Mad Libs with the Constitution. One neighbor had been fined $200, 0 cents, for unapproved wind direction. Another showed a copy of a rule banning porch swings due to potential emotional disturbance. By the fourth witness, the jury looked like they were watching live theater. And Loretta? She fumed in her chair like a discount Bond villain waiting for her plan to uncontest. Then came the detonation. As the verdict loomed, Loretta jumped up and shrieked, "I am the HOA," with the intensity of a soap opera queen slapped mid-monologue. The courtroom froze. The judge, without blinking, leaned into the mic and said, "Not anymore." The gavel came down like thunder on the ranch. You can write fake rules and slap on fake fines, but you can't gaslight a jury holding receipts and wearing reading glasses. "What's in the briefcase?" Ned opens after the verdict that makes the gallery gasp. Comment, ranch secrets, if you're betting it's something juicier than legal pads. For the first time in Lazy Ridge history, HOA meetings ended in hugs, not subpoenas. Someone brought brownies, someone else brought a mariachi band. Democracy's weird, but it slaps. We weren't a homeowners association anymore. We were a homeowners celebration. Loretta resigned with all the grace of a raccoon evicted from a jacuzzi. Her final words at the emergency meeting were, "This is a community of chaos now," which, ironically, was embroidered on the commemorative mugs we handed out that night. Within a week, we'd shredded the old rulebook like confetti at a freedom parade. No more chair permits, no more noise violations for wind chimes, and the ban on inflatable flamingos was finally overturned. You should have seen the joy in old Mrs. Kaplan's eyes when she plugged in her 12-foot flamingo with sunglasses and a solar-powered margarita. I got roped into being the unofficial HOA historian, which just meant people handed me their old fines and passive-aggressive emails to laminate and hang in the newly renamed Wall of Whimsy. We built a bench circle around the old koi pond, which now looked more like a moon crater filled with moss, and every Thursday folks brought folding chairs, crock-pots, and stories. Someone even knitted a commemorative sweater for my truck that read, "Parked with Purpose." Things had shifted from HOA panic to HOA potluck. Then came the lawn vote, a unanimous decision to convert Loretta's front yard into a public parklet named Public Roots. The ceremony featured a ribbon made of sourdough baguettes and a toddler singing, "This land is your land," off-key but with serious conviction. The benches were carved from repurposed fence posts that Loretta had once fined us for being aesthetic disruptions. Now they were symbols of peace, splinters and all. But just when I thought we'd turned the last page of this wild HOA soap opera, a letter showed up. No return address, just a single envelope with lipstick smeared across the seal like a tabloid from 1998. Inside, a note in Loretta's signature dramatic cursive. "You won, but I planted one last seed." I stared at it like it was ticking. Neighbors hovered behind me like we'd opened a cursed treasure map. Suspicions sprouted faster than weeds in June. When people sit down together, tyrants stand alone, and sometimes leave cryptic farewell notes like a discount Bond villain. What's sprouting where her koi pond used to be? 3 months later, a single tulip sprouted in the middle of the public parklet. Bright purple, smelling like redemption and cheap perfume. It was the kind of floral rebirth that whispered, "Plot twist." Nobody claimed to have planted it. And honestly, it had the aura of a resurrected HOA grudge disguised as spring. That very afternoon, I got another envelope. No stamp, just taped to the bench card from Loretta's ex-fence. Inside, a note that read, "Look under the third stone past the koi crater. Sincerely, History." Naturally, I took a shovel and Mildred. She brought her emergency muffins and a flashlight. We pried up the stone like we were unearthing cursed treasure, and sure enough, there it was. A sealed Tupperware box, buried deep enough to raise eyebrows, but not deep enough to beat HOA gossip. Inside the time capsule, a collection of chaos. Handwritten drafts of fake bylaws with red lipstick X's, receipts for ranch aesthetic consulting, and wait for it, a laminated napkin that read, "I may have lost, but at least I made history." Loretta's legacy wasn't just control, it was flair. The community took one look and unanimously decided to turn it into an annual holiday. Mildred named it Loretta Day, a day to dress in faux power suits, file fake citations, and prank each other with inflatable flamingos and bogus bench permits. Kids now TP mailboxes with streamers marked violation. But the biggest jolt came when I was clearing old boards from the shed and tripped over a hunk of cement. It looked familiar. Too familiar. I flipped it over, and there they were. L24, carved into the back. It was the original concrete chunk from my hijacked driveway. Somehow it had made its way back to me like the haunted teddy bear in a horror movie, but with more zoning violations. I couldn't tell if I felt haunted or impressed. Loretta hadn't vanished. She'd rebranded. We turned that concrete piece into a birdbath. The HOA voted to name it the Curb of Destiny. Tourists stopped by for photos, even the postman took selfies. Somehow, the symbol of my greatest frustration had become a punchline and a local landmark. History doesn't bury tyrants, it plants them, waters the chaos and turns the whole mess into a flower bed of jokes. Who renamed the HOA group chat to Cemented Legends? Type Loretta if you think the answer is Mildred. We bolted the retired parking meter to a polished cedar base, right next to a plaque that read, "Here lies HOA tyranny, $50, 0 cents/HR. Folks come from 3 towns over just to take pictures with it. The kids call it Loretta's toll booth to nowhere. I call it closure with coin return. Lazy Ridge now runs on potlucks and power drills, not paperwork and paranoia. Mildred started a monthly tool swap that no fines, just socket wrenches and gossip. One guy loaned out a chainsaw and got back banana bread. Even our local conspiracy theorist, Frank, stopped mailing himself HOA violation notices. We laughed so hard someone nominated him honorary sheriff of lawn chairs. My daughter, Harper, smart as a whip and full of sass, wrote a children's book called The Lady Who Yelled at Lawns. It's about a woman who screamed at squirrels and tried to evict a tree. Critics called it Dr. Seuss meets court-ordered therapy. She read it aloud at the final HOA cookout, where the grill smoked like justice and the burgers dripped with emotional closure. Then came the piñata, a papier-mâché Loretta, pearl necklace and all, dangling above the bean dip. We filled it with glitter, expired sardine coupons, and tiny plastic gavels. First swing went to Betty. That woman's swing could bench press guilt. When the piñata burst, a gust of glitter hit the potato salad and not a single soul cared. That's when I knew. We weren't just free, we were festive. I raised my lemonade, looked out over the crowd, parents, kids, former enemies turned chilly rivals, and said, "I lost a driveway, but we found our backbone." They cheered like someone had just bulldozed the word compliance. So what started as a driveway dispute ended with a barbecue, a piñata, and a neighborhood reborn. I didn't just fight back. I learned how to out-paperwork the paper pushers, outlast the power-hungry, and outlaugh the hate. I went from being the guy fined for parking his work truck to the man who turned a parking meter into a town monument. Funny how cement and sarcasm make the strongest foundation. Loretta thought she'd written the rules in stone. But here's the truth. Rules don't scare people. Bullies with clipboards do. When we stood together, when we turned her own game against her with humor, law, and a little glitter, we reclaimed more than property. We reclaimed our dignity. The deeper lesson? You don't need a bulldozer to tear down a wall. You need community, courage, and maybe a grandma with a goose full of bylaws. You're not powerless, just unpracticed in creative justice. So if this story made you laugh, think, or picture your HOA Karen getting smacked by a piñata shaped like herself, smash that like button, drop your own HOA horror in the comments, and hit subscribe so you never miss a new story where ridiculous gets wrecked and the underdog leaves with receipts and a parking permit, because in this community we pave the road to justice with glitter.